So I'd like to now introduce the next panel, and this panel is going to look at LiDAR use in Mexico from different standpoints. So we have, we'll hear from three speakers, and they're discussing three very different aspects in some ways of issues related to LiDAR and archaeology in Mexico. We have Kathryn Reese-Taylor, who will start off by discussing issues with LiDAR and decolonizing it. And I'm very interested in this because I think it parallels some of the things that we've talked about a little bit earlier. Rodrigo Solinis-Casparius, who will discuss the mapping of ancient roads and approach to identify and understand movement in past landscapes. And then we'll finish up with José Luis Punzo-Díaz, who's an archaeologist at the National Institute of Anthropology and History in Mexico. And he'll look at the rules and regulations regarding the archaeological use of LiDAR in Mexico. If I am correct in my understanding of all of the talks, I hope I got those mostly right. Now, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the question and answer box down at the bottom. I'm going to turn off and we'll try to answer those at the end. We have an hour for this. I'll turn off my video now and mute my microphone. I'll turn it over to Kathryn.
I would like to thank the organizers of the Earth Archive Conference, especially Chris Fisher and Steve Leisz for the invitation to participate. As well, I would like to thank the conference sponsors. And finally, I would like to acknowledge and thank the scholars who allowed me to use data from their projects or who shared their ideas with me concerning the decolonization of digital heritage. The democratization of heritage through digital access is a well-documented aspiration. It has included innovative ways to manage interpretation, express heritage values, and create experiences through the decoding of heritage. However, as the field of digital heritage, including LiDAR reconnaissance, has developed, issues regarding funding, access, dissemination, collaboration, and colonialism have arisen that have stymied this goal, leading to what we refer to as digital elitism in some regions of the world. In this presentation, we will specifically address two areas of concern that have proven to be particularly vexing and with which we are specifically involved in our various projects, those of accessibility and decolonization. Issues of accessibility that we will discuss include policy creation and implementation, data management, data accessibility, and the technology gap. Issues of decolonization and community collaboration include consultation with local communities and collaborative community-based projects. Issues of access are inherent in the initial acquisition and availability of LiDAR for research purposes. We definitely have recognized a skewing of accessibility towards researchers from countries in the global north. Most publicly available data sets are located in these countries, with the notable inclusion of Mexico. In addition, researchers have acquired wide area data sets in additional countries in the global south, including Cambodia, Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. However, because of the cost of LiDAR reconnaissance, most of these wide area coverages have been initiated by foreign scholars and have been focused on large-scale research projects. To alleviate a bias in LiDAR collection due to the prohibitively high cost of flying small-scale surveys, NCALM initiated a small projects grant program. This program helped to fund 6 projects in 2019, and several more are pending to be flown in 2022 in Mexico. Of the 6 projects in 2019, 4 were in Belize, 2 in Guatemala, and 1 project in El Salvador. They ranged in flight from 10 to 30 square kilometers and included 4 PIs from the US, 1 PI from Canada, 1 from Guatemala, and 1 from El Salvador. While this program has certainly increased accessibility for smaller projects, The majority of the PIs are from the US and Canada, outside of the countries in which the LiDAR was acquired, and still skewing the statistics to the global north. Another issue related to accessibility involves the creation of policies regarding the acquisition and administration of LiDAR datasets, as well as ownership of the data in various countries. LiDAR surveys in Latin America have exploded, but government policies regarding acquisition and access have lagged, resulting in a lack of oversight and questions of data ownership. At present in Mexico, policies regarding LiDAR surveys for archaeological prospection are at times opaque and do not align with those of other agencies. For example, the Instituto Nacional de Antropología e Historia, or INAH, has no written policy or procedures for the acquisition and disposition of LiDAR used for archaeological prospection in Mexico, although we understand and are hopeful that this is going to change very shortly. However, requirements by the Instituto Nacional de Estadística y Geografía, or INEGI, which regulates airspace in Mexico, include a letter of authorization from INAH in order to grant permits for LiDAR flights focused on archaeological prospection. Consequently, procedures that principal investigators of projects are required to follow to obtain permission for LiDAR surveys are ill-defined, and the question of data ownership is still unresolved. As well, policies between agencies in different countries can be in conflict. Often, government agencies in the US and Canada require that data be open access and archived on servers within their borders. This conflicts with sovereignty laws in various countries. For instance, the Belizean Institute of Archaeology restricts access to LiDAR in order to prevent looting. One way we have found to resolve these international policy conflicts is by establishing formal partnerships. Compromises can be reached between agencies, and memorandums of understandings between both public and private institutions are commonly being used to formalize such agreements. Our project, which is funded by both the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada and the National Science Foundation of the US, has a formal MOU with INAH Campeche, and INAH Campeche is a formal partner in our most recent grant for prospection in the Calakmul biosphere. This agreement states that the LiDAR we acquire in the Calakmul biosphere will be turned over to INAH to administer, while we mirror sites for archiving and management in Canada, the US, and at UNAM for research purposes. In other words, we got out of the role of administering the LiDAR and have turned that over completely to INAH. An additional issue that hinders accessibility is the lack of technological resources. We're fortunate in that we have partners with excellent technological resources, but overcoming the technological gap is a serious issue that needs to be addressed to ensure the equitable accessibility of LiDAR. This gap includes both the lack of training in various parts of the world, as well as the lack of equipment and software. At this time, funding for various types of training, including workshops, personnel exchanges, and limited equipment and software is now available through both public granting agencies and private foundations. Eligible researchers should make seeking such funding a priority. Training and workshops are now even more accessible because of the experience we've acquired in remote learning. However, the expense of software and high-capacity computers still impede access for many. This technology gap is also present in countries from the global north. In Canada, technological resources are lacking in many parts of the Arctic, making LiDAR and other types of digital heritage difficult to utilize and administer in these regions. One upcoming University of Calgary UNAM workshop is planned for January 2022 to bring together participants from Canada, Mexico, and the US. This workshop will focus on capacity and partnership building to address issues such as managing and sharing data between large and small universities and public institutions, such as INAH and the Comisión Nacional de Áreas Naturales Protegidas, or CONAP. Addressing the technological gap and sharing resources will be a major focus of discussion in this workshop. While issues of privacy and informed consent of descendant communities regarding LiDAR survey and other forms of remote sensing is of paramount concern in discussions of decolonization. We refer you to Adrian Chase et al. 2020 for a discussion of these issues. Meaningful decolonization and community collaboration takes time and effort. It involves building relationships and establishing equitable partnerships. It is not easy and demands that we confront our own biases and what in Canada is known as settler fragility. The literature on decolonization is extensive and not possible to cover in our short time, but in this section we will discuss 3 examples of community collaboration and decolonization from Belize, Canada, and Mexico. The Alabama Map app by the Stand Creek Regional Archaeological Project was funded by the National Geographic Foundation and with a grant to Dr. Sean G. Morton and Megan Paramaki-Brown. The Alabama app is an augmented reality program designed in consultation with local Maya-Mopan teachers and education professionals to teach local heritage in primary schools. With the explosion of smartphones throughout the world, apps such as these are ideal for learning and sharing data with local communities, and this app was a priority goal for the Maya-Mopan community in southern Belize. The Arviat Archaeology and Oral History Project was directed by Dr. Peter Dawson and was the focus of Dr. Natasha Lyons' dissertation. In this project, the interests of the local communities were primary. Research was managed jointly and knowledge production shared among archaeologists and community members. The Arviat Archaeology focused on place names and travel routes and oral histories of elders from the Arviat community located in Nunavut. And for those of you who don't know where the Nunavut territory is, I've included a map for you to see how extensive this area is, and it includes Baffin Island. In this project, a focus on the distant past shifted in favor of the contact traditional period. This is a past that is collectively remembered and relevant to communities. Archaeological approaches incorporated diverse elements such as place names, oral histories, and cultural landscapes into research design and interpretations. Finally, to have been initiated in 2020, the Bajo Laberinto Chiclero project is a collaborative community project that focuses on the interests and concerns of the local communities surrounding the Calakmul biosphere. These communities are communities of mixed populations. While there are a number of Maya speakers in these communities, most are Chol speakers who migrated into the area during the 20th century. Other migrants include people from El Salvador, other parts of Mexico, including Tabasco especially, as well as Guatemala. Like the Arviat Archaeology Project, these communities are interested in the collective past remembered by their elder members. Headed by Dr. Veronica Vasquez Lopez, our team of anthropologists and archaeologists will collect oral histories from former Chicleros and tie their recollections to the landscape surrounding the Bajo Laberinto. To enhance our oral histories, we will solicit INAH's approval to use limited blocks of LiDAR to locate historic encampments, usually located near aguadas or permanent water sources. Place names and travel routes will be recorded. Spatial analysis of routes and archaeological excavations will commence in future years if community members deem this to be a priority. Avenues for dissemination of knowledge, co-created by community members and researchers, will also be jointly determined. Our project's first collaborative community project has only been designed, but we have learned several lessons in this process. First, remote sensing and other technology are valuable data sets that interest communities, but are not always easily accessible. Fortunately, it is becoming easier to design end-user products based on ease of use, as seen in the Alabama app, which uses augmented reality. Raising funds for collaborative community projects is not as straightforward as traditional research. Like some universities, not all granting agencies value community-driven goals. which align with the decolonization of the discipline. Finally, collaborative community projects require dedicated staff, flexibility, and an openness to exploring new approaches, and most of all, ample time for trust and collaborations to grow. As COVID has delayed our project, we cannot report on our successes, but we are eager to begin our work. In conclusion, the ethical issues specific to LiDAR outlined in this paper are in many ways a byproduct of the history of archaeology as a colonial discipline. They did not appear overnight, nor will they disappear rapidly. These issues will take systemic change to eradicate. Nonetheless, we do see many of us taking our first clumsy steps toward equity, accessibility, and decolonization in our work, and it is heartening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathryn. That was a fascinating look at those issues that you raise. I'm going to now ask Rodrigo to turn his camera on.
Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you everyone for inviting me to be part of this amazing initiative. I've been very excited since yesterday, listening and seeing all the work that many people are doing and how excited everyone is to be part of this. I'm talking about a case study, one actually that might have been a catalyst for Chris and Steve in thinking about this archaeological site where they started working with LiDAR that I've been part of as other researchers, and particularly about, I'm going to be talking about some of the research that I've been doing on this, which is understanding the movement within the city, kind of like the city streets of this ancient site in Western Mexico. So I'll be talking about that in a bit, but I want to start by giving sense of this approach of using LiDAR to understand human behavior from the past. And I'm not going to do a history of what LiDAR has been for archaeology, but as everyone was saying, as Kathryn was just mentioning, it's a process where we're learning not only the tools that we can use, but how they can help us or inform us for the kinds of research that we want to do, right? So I'm being a little generous, but I'll say that for 20 years, first, when we encountered the possibilities of using LiDAR for archaeology, we were very excited about how it was helping us to see where we couldn't before, right? Essentially because it gave us the ability to see under the thick canopy. But it also because the other way to get into these areas was by food, right? By spending time in the field. And that takes a lot of time and of course, money. So all those were like invigorating and exciting opportunities for applying LiDAR. But it hasn't been only until like, I think in the last 10 years where we've been as archaeologists thinking, yes, this is all good. It's helping us find sites or find human habitation in these areas that we couldn't before. But what else we can do with LiDAR, right? How can we use it to what in archaeology we say, and we call anthropological questions, which really is understanding human behavior, right? Like the relationship of people with their environment and the social organization, the kinds of diets, how they're living with each other, kinds of political structures, these kinds of questions, how can we get to them by using LiDAR data or derived data from LiDAR, right? And it is the same way that we're using it to find sites, right? Because it helps us expand our perspective. We can use LiDAR to change the scale of what we're looking at, and I guess in two ways. In one way, it opens our eyes to a broader space, right? But it also gives us the opportunity to see data at different resolution, very high resolution, that then we can think of how do we use. And when we do that, we're gaining an ability to start seeing all these elements in context, right? To have a holistic view. So this is how LiDAR is really I don't know, revolutioning the archaeological work in some ways. And a little bit of that is what I want to talk about today. So one cultural phenomenon that fits very well in this like open, wider spectrum or context, this landscape view is precisely movement, right? And this is something that I've been concentrating and they want to use for this particular site in Angamuco. movement occurs through really we're moving the landscapes and we're doing by affecting it, right? We're changing the landscape. We establish an infrastructure that is not just one or few roads, it's actually a system, a network of many different roads that are helping us go to different places or to transport things between areas or urban settings. And so, but they have an impact, right? They change the landscape. And of course, there are many different types of these systems. So we have to pay attention to what they are or what they're moving. So when we are, as archaeologists, try to understand movement and we're trying to find the evidence associated to that, we either pay attention to what we call the proxy evidence, right? Materials that are not supposed to be here, but they're here. So how they got here, how they were brought here, and material culture that is associated directly to the act of moving, right? Like ancient cards or sandals or things like that. But mostly the infrastructure that is used to move around. And that is this system of roads. Traditionally, we do that, or we've done that doing surveys and mapping in the field using geophysics and, of course, remote sensing and GIS. LiDAR is one of those remote sensing techniques that is helping us see these networks. And we've seen a bunch of examples yesterday and today of people who are getting a little bit of information about these road networks in different parts of the world. So let's see if I can show you how I was trying to look at understanding these systems of moving around within an urban environment. And that is the case study of Angamuco. So for those who know a little bit about Mesoamerica, this is clear, but for those who are not familiarized with this part of history of ancient Mexico, there was this big empire at the time of the Aztecs, right? The rival of the Aztecs called the Purepecha Empire. And their nuclear area is, I don't know if you can see my cursor, I'm just pointing at things. But in this western part of Mexico, now the current modern state of Michoacan, the nuclear area of that is where the Purepecha Empire flourished. It had its capitals. And right next to them is this site of Angamuco. We call it Angamuco. We don't know what it was called in the time that people were living there, right? And I don't know if you have heard talks by Chris, how he talks about how we first encountered this site. We first started documented. Of course, the people that have been living there know that there is a site for a long time. But it looks like this, right? We're finding structures associated to this Purepecha Empire and materials. So immediately we thought this is a city that is connected to the empire. Of course, after did a lot of work, let me go back one, and excavations, we realized that it's actually a lot older than the empire. Over 1,000 years before the empire even existed, there were people living here. All right. But we started looking into that, and this is a picture on the right of how it looks like, right? It's very heavily forested area. There's a lot of medium-sized trees and shrubs and vegetation that doesn't let the regular remote sensing techniques to see through or to map it. And this is a picture from above from a few days ago from Google Earth. So you can see it's completely covered in vegetation. This all green part is the site. So in 2010, and this is a picture of how the site looks like. It's not a very good picture, but you can see this is a digital elevation model for it. And I'm going to concentrate on this lower polygon here, this bottom part, which is the area that we have studied the most in the last few years. And this is just to see, for you to see the topography. I don't have the values, but this is a higher topography in this lower topography, right? In 2010 and then 15, Chris and Steve managed to get some LiDAR scanning for this site. And when they did that, originally, they didn't have the intention to explore roads or to understand the social configuration of the site. They just wanted to have a sense of the urban plan of the site, right? The dimensions of it. Maybe they have different questions. In a minute, I'm going to show you how other researchers have found a lot of use of the same LiDAR scan data and derived data from them. But just to give you a sense of what we're looking at, this little square here, which is something that some other presenters have showed different versions of this part of the site, but this is a blown up zoom in of the site, right, of this little square. You see here a pyramid, similar to the one that I was showing, some altars here and some walls made of stone. This is a big plaza on a big platform. You see a sunken area here. All these things, kind of squarish that you see here on top, those are, we call them rooms, but they're really houses where people were living and different activities. You even can see some terraces here in this hill. You see more structures here. You see other platforms in these sides, plazas. So as you can see, it's a massive area with a lot of engagement of the people with their landscape. They're changing it because they're living there. They're adapting this place to whatever they need to. But this is repeated all over the site. So every little dot that you see in this site is one structure, a man-made structure. We only map about 7,000 of them, but we calculate for this entire bottom part of the site, there's over 40,000. So it's a massive urban center, not the biggest of Mesoamerica, not the most important one of Mesoamerica, just an example of how massive urban centers were in this part of the world at this time period, right? And then we continue doing work on it, doing excavations to learn more about them, the time periods where people were living there, the kinds of structures and the use, and something more about their culture, right? And I want to now start talking about understanding a little bit of the urban plan, but understanding how people are moving around this place. Usually when we're doing LiDAR analysis in archaeology, we either take a look, we have these scans, and then we process that, we look at things that might be interesting, and then go to the field and confirm what we're looking at, right? The value of this work in this site is that we had those scans at the beginning that help us develop the questions, the research questions that we were interested in. In this case, for roads, then I was able to go back knowing something that I was seeing in the computer, right? Go and take a look in the field and then come back to the computer and continue working with the data that I was producing or collecting both in the field and through the computer. These are two examples of different roads in the site. They look very different. Some of them, if you believe me, this is a road, it is paved, and this one is just a little eroded pathway, right? So it really doesn't have a lot of construction. It wasn't easy to find all the different kinds of roads within, or pathways or city streets within the city, just by looking at the LiDAR data. So I needed to go down into the field and spend some time with some people trying to have a sense of how they look like, right? And so with them, we were like mapping and measuring these things using GPS or GNSS receivers to map them digitally. As you can see, I was loading this LiDAR into these mobile computers that we were using in the field. And after a lot of work there, spending some time, we had a sense of some of these city streets in the site. It wasn't much, but it was very good because it gave us a sense of how they might look like in the computer, right? And then so I came back to the LiDAR data or derived data. This is DEM, hill shade that is symbolized. The blue is the higher point. This is a big escarpment. But just by looking at it, you can identify some features that look like roads, right? These are major roads, important roads. But they are not the only ones that exist in the site. I knew that because we spent some time in the field and we were mapping them. So some of the things can be immediately observed by using these materials, right, from LiDAR. But it wasn't enough. So the first thing we needed to do, I needed to create some sort of like a dictionary of what kind of like a criteria, what kind of features that I could see in the computer through different modifications of images and modeling, would look like a likely pedestrian, pre-Hispanic, and human road, right? Because the goal was to identify every single feature that might be an ancient road. And then through processes of image analysis, a little bit of modeling, then I was able to start observing, extracting, and finding all those possible roads, which was the goal. But the thing is that not every single possible pre-Hispanic human road was actually one of them. So I needed to evaluate these features that we were like extracting to all these post-processing analysis in the computer. Examples of that, I need to contrast these with the observations in the field to correct some of these road extractions. But a good example of that is something like this. This is a feature like a road, right? Similar to all those red ones. So the blue one, it looked like it's straight road. That's not a problem. Straight roads exist in this side. And usually when they are straight, it's because they prepare the ground for it, right? They dig through the topography to make them flat, or they're in a flat area. But if I look at the profile of this area, this is the same road, right? It has part of it that goes very steep up, and then kind of flat on the top, and then down very steep again. This is not the way people build roads in this side. This is not how you want to build a road, right? You either use stairs to go up and down, or switchbacks or something like that. Just imagine an older person that lives here is not going to go down this steep road every time he wants to visit someone down there or get water or something else, right? So it didn't look like a road. Then I also contrast that with some of the architecture that we have mapped. And then I found that it's kind of confusing because all the features here are the same color, but pay attention to the ones in the center. These are like plazas or open areas or terraces, but the ones here are buildings, right? Houses. This road is crossing through on top of these houses. It doesn't make sense, right? So comparing these kinds of things and evaluating roads like this, in this case, I think this is a modern, non-human road. This is probably a pathway that was created by cattle that have been roaming free in this site for the last, 100 years. So probably they're responsible for this particular pathway. So it was important to do these kinds of evaluations to see not everything that you see in LiDAR can be the result of what, or in this case, human Hispanic roads. But this is just the beginning, right? Extracting the roads or the network for this ancient city is just one way to start analyzing or observing other more interesting human behaviors. Other things that are interesting to me, things that had to do with understanding if there's evidence of planning of these roads, how much the topography is influencing how people are building them. Are they built or they're just created by nature? How are they built? Where are they going? What areas of the city are more visited or likely to be visited, or which ones are secluded in purpose? Can we see, and I think I have a couple of slides for these, areas of the site that are more densely populated, probably. So there might be interesting to go and explore, probably a different time period of habitation, maybe an area where different groups of people, social classes are living. Other areas that are secluded that particularly people, not everyone can go and access to as easily. Finding major roads or finding the most likely trafficked areas of the site. These kinds of analysis can be done, but and just an example of many others, none of these can be done without having that open, big scale, big, good, high resolution data that LiDAR can provide. Other examples of this kind of work that has been done with the same data sets beyond the urbanism element that the project has been trying to think of, people like Reese-Taylor have been looking at like the family structures within the site, like these kind of like similar to city blocks in our modern cities, and how they're created and where are they in the site, centers of power. Alex Friedel has been looking at pyramids throughout the site and what things are around them and how people are growing their food. Selena Westbury has been looking at terraces and patios. And a very cool project from Nick Simpson looking at how people are using water, how they're catching the water, building these tanks and other reservoirs to use the water, and even other tools that can be helpful for doing some of these analysis, like Edwin Harris, who was trying to develop a tool to more easily identify features, human-made features in this site. None of this work can be done without LiDAR data. We could have done, but also we didn't know that we were getting into these kinds of questions and exploring these kinds of things at the beginning when the LiDAR was obtained, right? When the scanning was happening. And it is just, I guess, just an example of how I believe the Earth Archive Initiative has this goal. We're not exactly sure of the many different ways in we can use all the data that we can produce by scanning the planet. But it will be useful, and we will find ways, and it will tell us more about not the human past, but also what's happening today in all these areas. So I just want to thank all the people who have been involved in this project from the beginning, and people that helped with this analysis. And I'll stop now.
Okay, thank you very much, Rodrigo. It was very interesting. And if you can stop sharing, I'm going to turn it over to José now. And he'll have 20 or so minutes, and then we can go into questions if anyone has them. So it's all yours, José.
Well, first of all, I want to say thanks to the organizers of this conference. I think it's amazing. Yesterday we really have terrific papers and they're very interesting. And these two papers that was before me was very, very important. I will talk a lot of things very related to Kathryn mentioned it. I think we are in a lot of the same ideas. So, well, I will start. I work for the National Institute in Mexico, and I will talk about the uses of LiDAR in Mexico, but in the institutional point of view. But regarding of my own research in Michoacan, that it's also I have to say thanks to Rodrigo because he talked a lot about Michoacan archaeology, so I can skip that part. Well, first of all, I want to say that I'm totally agree with Kathryn about this problem of the colonization of the science and the digital patrimony in these with these kind of studies. So even making a very short look in the principal websites that we all that we uses a lot, like Google Scholar, Scopus, of Web of Science, uh, and looking for academic papers with LiDAR and Mexican and archaeology, we have a suppressive in Google Scholar almost 2,000 hits, but more specific probably in the Scopus or Web of Science that we have a little more than 200. But the important thing here, it's like the 97% are in English. There are very, very few in Spanish. So that's one of the issues that Kathryn was addressing about these. Also, it's very surprising that because of normally we are talking about archaeology and a big percentage of those are for archaeology, but also there are a lot of different science now using different approaches with LiDAR, with LiDAR data in Mexico. But a lot of these projects are vinculated or are joined with archaeological projects. So there's a lot of papers relating to geology, volcanology, or biology. And I think it was one of the important things that Rodrigo says, like this LiDAR data goes away over the archaeological purposes or the original purposes that was acquired for. So it's so important to think out of the box and think more widely on these kind of things in the LiDAR use. Other important thing, and Kathryn also addressed it, is like most of the projects that do LiDAR, and Juan Carlos Fernandez from NCALM yesterday was mentioned that most of the projects are in the Mayan area. And well, that's a very important issue because as we know in Mexico, most of the international projects are based on the Maya region than anywhere else in Mexico. Other ones are in the Gulf Coast. Central valleys of Mexico have a very few LiDAR analysis, and surprising, Michoacan, we have like 3 areas with LiDAR coverage that makes in the western part of Mexico a unique case. Also, I was looking for the projects that are approved with LiDAR permits on Mexico now, and I looked by like 22 projects that are joined that have approvals to do LiDAR in Mexico that Kathryn was mentioning, and I was addressed at the end of the talk. And of these 22 projects, only 5 have Mexican participants in those projects, and only 3 were directed by Mexican researchers. So with that on mind, it's more powerful the things our Kathryn are saying about this inequality in this access for LiDAR analysis. You know, LiDAR it's still so expensive for a regular Mexican project. So well, we go advance and talk about this later. But well, the National Institute of Anthropology and History, el INAH, we have like 3 main things that we're responsible by law in Mexico. So one is the research of the archaeological questions that are in the country, but on the other hand, we have to do a lot of efforts in conservation and in the dissemination of this knowledge. So for the big audience, so we have this public visit into our sites and museums, etc. So I will divide this talk in these 3 main topics. With my own research, but in terms of but it's one of the things that all INAH needs to do in Mexico as a mandatory by law. So my project that I want to talk about here, it's real. We are neighbors with Rodrigo. Rodrigo talks about Angamuco, that it's a city that is actually in the same municipality as the 2 sites that I'm working on. I'm working Sinsunsan and Iguazio. Both are the capital cities of the empire of the Purepecha Empire that was Rodrigo was talking us about, and we have a project sponsored by CONACYT in Mexico to have a high resolution LiDAR in all this area in a 50 square kilometers in that covers these 2 cities. So of course we are looking for keys of urbanization and these kind of issues, but of course there's a big group that are working on or more specific projects like the ones that Rodrigo just told us. But the interesting thing is that we have like 2 very different cities here, like Sinsunsan on the right and Iguazio that it's very orthogonal side. So, but on the other hand, also we are working with terrestrial LiDAR for recording the buildings, not only the aerial LiDAR, but also terrestrial LiDAR for recording all the buildings or the architecture in detail in 3D. Also, we work with different universities, the University of Auckland in New Zealand, the UNAM in Mexico, and we work with DJI for drone analysis on these sites to do these kind of models that are very helpful for different projects to us. And with NCALM, we are working on the LiDAR acquisition of the area. So we are working as a lot of everybody does with these hillshade models and different approaches to slope models or multi-directional slope modeling, like the ones we are seeing here in one of the main parts of the city. So we can see that obviously doing these on the field, on the survey on the field, well, it takes us a lot of time, and it's very difficult to see the features that we are looking for. And here, for instance, we are able to see the density of terraces that we have. Not even to this year, we have a real big map of the city, of this very, very important city, one of the most important cities when the Spanish arrived into Mexico in the 16th century. And now we are recording more than, well, a lot more now than 1,000 of different terraces and structures, pyramids on this huge city that covers more than 900 hectares around 1,000 now, and it's very almost connected to the next city that it's Iguazio. So the LiDAR for research, and I will stop here. It's everybody knows that for archaeology it's so important. It's a revolution, and now makes us to look things absolutely different than happens before. And also I am quoting a French friend of mine, an archaeologist, a French archaeologist friend of mine, that says me a couple of years ago, that when they do LiDAR, for them was the most cheapest way to do archaeology. And it was very surprising. I said, well, how? Because it's so expensive for us. But he says, well, yeah, but we have like 30 years coming every year to Mexico to do research, and with the LiDAR, we found things that we never see in 40 minutes. Uh, so I think it is that we need to think about these kind of issues. Well, passing into conservation, and I think it's one of the most important things here for us. It's like LiDAR is another technology that we are not now just exploring as as an amazing and the most important tool for a huge projects like the one that I'm involved with the Maya train, the Tren Maya, that we are covering more than 1,000 kilometers of on this big infrastructure made by the government, and now we have lidar of the all the ways where the train it's gonna pass, and we analyze all these segments of the road, and now we are discovering huge cities, and we are being able to better conduct our crews that are in the field, looking for the structures and trying to avoid the route, and making a more important way to preserve this rich patrimony that it's in this area. But in a lower scale also, we use it in Sinsunsan area. Like as we can see here, we can see a part gonna be for housing, for houses, for habitational purposes. And now we have able with the LiDAR to analyze better the terrain and be more efficient with our salvage archaeology projects for protecting the city, uh, and recover the most of information. Other very important issue is like Mexico. We are in a earthquake zone, and with a place where there happens a lot of disasters like hurricanes, etc. So, for instance, we are doing this in Iguazio, that it's another archaeological zone, and fortunately, we have this project for 7 years ago. I started doing mapping of 3D and of 3D mapping of all the archaeological sites open to the public, and in this case, we can see how this could be useful when we have this kind of problems that happens in 2017 with one of the pyramids in Iguazio, and now we have this digital twin, so we can restore in a very proper way. So the public visit, it's another important issue for us in INAH, and it's also mandatory by law. In so we now have around of 54,000 um, sites recorded in the country, and well, this is increasing every day with all the archaeological projects are mandatory needs to upload all the findings that they have. We only have 194 open to the public. So as we can see, it's a tremendous task if we think that we are 300 archaeologists in all Mexico in INAH. So it's very important the use of these kind of new technologies to try to proper protect this big patrimony that we have in Mexico. So but in the other hand, also these 194 archaeological sites open to the public receive more than 26 million people every year. So the uses of different technologies like LiDAR or this 3D modeling is so important for dissemination also, about more than in another like the preservation. So we are looking for uh, working in our sites with augmented reality, with with virtual reality goggles and things like that, for making more accessible to the public, or even virtual tours into our site. So, but this is very important, but it is not possible if we don't have these very good uh, reconstruction of sites in 3D using LiDAR, but also using photogrammetry, drones, terrestrial LiDAR, aerial LiDAR, etc. So we are a couple of examples here that are the work that we are doing here in Michoacan. And well, only for closing, I'm absolutely agree with Kathryn, and we need to think about ethical principles to do this kind of work anywhere in the world. So first, I think it's important to have consultation with the communities, local governments, and other stakeholders with the interest in the research, because a lot of the work that we've done as an archaeologist and having these resources, these monetary resources to do this kind of work, it's so important for tiny municipalities like Sinsunsan for in this case, because they can do a lot of growing plans, management plans of the city, and another kind of things. We are working now doing ecological restoration with a canopy that Chris hates so much. Uh, as he mentioned yesterday, well, all the archaeologists wants to take over the canopy, but the biologist loves it. So it's very important to make these. Also, the researchers most observe the regulations and the jurisdiction of the places where they are working, because we are a lot of times a lot of people jump these kind of regulations and do it by themselves, and it's very important to have this on mind. And three, the researchers must share the results with the communities, local governments, and other researchers. Yeah, because it's so important, and a lot of people do it, and a lot of archaeological projects in Mexico do it. Like Kathryn mentioned it, like I can say, like Travis Stanton, like Chris, of course, Chris Fisher is very generous with their own data, but this has to be a something on regular basis for everyone. And fourth, and also mentioned by Kathryn, we need to encourage the contribution to building capacities in the places what we are working on. So that's so important. And only answering Kathryn about her question, the new regulations in Mexico in this Article 34, now we are looking for make more regulations and have these kind of LiDAR. Of course, we in INAH are very open or absolutely encouraging to do LiDAR in archaeology in Mexico, because have this kind of digital patrimony is very important for us. But also it's very important to these can be used for a wider audience and in different ways, not only be in the desktop of the computer of someone in any part of the world, and it's only using for that. And I think it's very important to have open access to all of these data for the preservation of the Mexican patrimony in this case. Well, thank you very much. And well, I'm here for the questions.
Thank you very much, Jose. That was a very interesting presentation. I had not seen those type of animations, virtual reality that you showed. So why don't Rodrigo and Kathryn also come on screen if you want to. And Are there any questions from the audience? Please put them into the question and answer. I have a question. Actually, I'd like to direct both at at all three of you. And that is, what strategies would you suggest for making this technology more accessible to local people? I'm thinking, and I mean, I was fascinated by the virtual reality that you showed, Jose. I'm wondering if that's is out there in the community in Sinsun, around the Pátzcuaro Basin, if people see that. What other ideas are out there?
Well, I think that every community is unique. And so I think the first thing you need to do is go into the community and see what their level of technological accessibility is, and see what they think they want in terms of accessing the data. So instead of there being this sort of one size fits all, I think you actually have to go in and consult with them. The augmented reality that José Luis has is something that they're also doing in Belize, and that we also would like to do. But when we went in to talk to the people in our community, in the communities that surround the biosphere, they were more interested in the oral histories and issues of understanding what in Canada is called traditional land use in the biosphere. So things like how the Chicleros use the land, and maybe what some of the former historic logging trails were. And so we decided to take their cue and work with them. We obviously wanted it to be meaningful to them. And so we're doing and trying to meet their goals, not ours. On the other hand, INAH may want to take the LiDAR that we're about to hopefully get for Calakmul in 2022 and do augmented reality. And that is perfectly great. I mean, that may be something that INAH wants to do. They're full partners in this. INAH will have all the LiDAR, and we will be ready to help them with the technological expertise they need in order to present augmented reality and give it to the tourists. But that's a decision that INAH needs to make. So our partnerships are such that we are not dictating what happens next, but we are taking cues. And it really depends on the actual stakeholder and what they deem their priorities to be. And if you're going into the Amazon, you're going to have a lot of work because there are a lot of stakeholders, and you're going to have a huge team that needs to go in and establish these relationships, because it's taken us a long time to build our relationships. We've been working in the biosphere for 10 years now. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks. Jose, do you want to have something to say?
No, yeah, I'm absolutely agree with Kathryn on that. One size doesn't fit all, and it's absolutely different to do things in Mexico, for instance, in West Mexico, or in the Mayan area, or in places like where I worked for a long time in the border with the United States. So I think people are absolutely different, and it's very important to talk with the local communities to see that. But also one of the important things here, or at least in my experience in West Mexico and North Mexico, it's like the cell phones are now a huge tool that is very accessible for a lot of people. So the young persons, the young people that goes into these sites or visit us, or we went into the schools with them, even in a very remote areas. uh, it's very interesting that they are very thirsty. They really want to have these kind of contents to for them. So I think it's one of the ways that we need to think more on these And instead of course, the traditional talks, the ways, for instance, like I know Rodrigo did it great with Chris in Michoacan, going into the square plazas, have these meetings over there, show them all these kind of things, bring to them these kind of augmented reality things, virtual reality things, and the people loves it. Now, for instance, was a big fire in one of the churches here in Michoacan with a very important inside paintings and things. And now we are working with the community in building a virtual reality access to to their church, and they are absolutely thrilled about that. But that came from them. So that's one of the very important things that Kathryn says. It's not the same everywhere.
Okay, thank you very much. I just looked at the time and we are actually 1 minute over.
Oops.
So that's okay. That's perfectly fine. It's really interesting. So Rodrigo, I'm not going to ask you to comment on it. I'll let you get out of it. But I would suggest that we all go back to track 1, where Bob Hansen should be starting his presentation fairly soon on technology enablers and the collectors of LiDAR data for the Earth. I think that'll be a very interesting conversation also. So we can all shut off here and head over to track 1. Thank you again very much. Very interesting presentations. Very good points for us to think about as we move forward. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.